Welcome to the 11th year of the commencement ceremonies for the North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics. I welcome the student graduates, the junior class, the parents, their guests, our staff, our students, and I would like to take special mention of our Board of Trustees who set the policy and the procedures for the North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics, the Educational Advisory Council, who provide insights into the direction that this particular program should provide, and the North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics Foundation, which provides the fiscal management and assistance in providing many of the opportunities that you have in the 2 years at this program. For these special guests on the board and council who are sitting here to the right, my right, would you please give a round of applause? I'm very pleased to be able to introduce our student speaker. At NCSSM, the student speaker is selected by a school-wide committee that reviews speeches submitted by the students who wish to participate and submit those speeches anonymously. The student speaker this year is John Love, who came to NCSSM from West Carteret High School in Morehead City. He will attend North Carolina State University and will major in forestry. I proudly present the student graduation speaker, John Love.
Goodness. Good morning, everybody. Hope y'all are awake out there. I know I didn't get much sleep last night, and I'm sure y'all didn't really get that much either. Last night was good. Last night was a chance to catch up on old times, a chance to reminisce and make those last efforts at the bonds of a friendship that you won't be able to revisit for a while. Last night was long, and in some ways it was too short. These 2 years have been long and hard for all of us, but now they're over. Looking back at the memories, the days spent out in the intramural field, the conversations over lunch in the cafeteria, the long mornings spent waiting in line at the clinic, the long nights spent sitting, studying with coffee in one hand and your head in the other, and the long weekends just spent hanging out with friends. As I reminisce over my 2 years here, what comes to mind over the wonderful education and over the innumerable opportunities that are offered here is the community. The community is what has made this experience so wonderful for me. Knowing that if I'm sick, a friend will come and check in on me, and if I need a friend, someone will always be there. After all, how can you learn someplace where you cannot live? This is a place where we have lived for 2 years. This is a place where we have learned for 2 years. And this is a place that I love. The science and math experience has changed us all, some for the better and some for the worse. Being here means exposure to new things, new people, new cultures, new ideas, and also new problems. Being here, we're forced to take a stance on issues and make up our minds for ourselves. We no longer have anyone to hold our hand and guide us while we learn, only someone to slap it when we screw up, firmly but gently. Not only do we have to choose for ourselves whether or not to do homework and to study, but also whether or not to make our beds in the morning and change the sheets, and whether or not to skip breakfast. Over Christmas break this year, I looked at the people in my hometown. I realized how different I was from all of them. We'd all had the same upbringing, the same environment, up until August 1990. It was then that I realized how much I had to thank for being here, and how much I've learned here. Coming through the science and math experience, we all have a future. We all have something instilled within us that only we can choose to use or not, and that's knowledge. Knowledge not just of chemical equations and unit circles and force diagrams and the history of America, but knowledge of ourselves, knowledge of the world around us. The life skills that we've learned here can never be measured. The gift of learning did not end in the classroom. We were given the opportunity, and I think pretty much all of us made the most of it. I hope that if you felt lonely at times, you knew that we were all here for you. And I hope that if you cried, you did not cry alone. There's a poem entitled Roots and Wings. One of its stanzas says, "Roots and wings I yearn for most of all. My longing to stay, my longing to go, come wrapped in the same package." For a long time now, I've been hearing a lot of people counting down the days until we walk across this stage. Well, I'm up here right now, and I don't feel any different. Those pieces of paper over there, they just tell us what we should already know inside, that we've earned the right to move on and to fly. These 2 years have given us the roots with which to plant our thoughts and ideas, and now we're given the wings to fly to wherever our imaginations can take us. What I've said up to this point has been for us, the graduating class. After all, it's our day. But being the person that I am, I can't give up this opportunity with a microphone and a captive audience to impart a little bit of me onto the vast numbers of people. So, I'll say a couple words. Parents and families, I have a hard time speaking to you. I know very few of you. What I have to say to you is this. When the time is right, and you'll know it, this child that you've raised these 18-odd years, when the time is right, let go. As the saying goes, if you let the bird fly away and it comes back, it was true love. Faculty, staff, and administration, this I say to you, listen. When words come from the heart, when they come from the soul, they matter. They are the truth, and you must listen. I may be but one voice can move a mountain. And juniors, class of 1993, make your voices heard. Unite. Come together and don't just speak for yourselves, speak for the greater community. Be a part of something so big and so strong that no one can ignore you, and that they have to listen. Because sometimes it ain't so easy to move mountains, and we all need some help. It seems like a very big privilege and a very big responsibility to deliver the last words of anyone, any student, to the graduating class of 1992. I thought long and hard about what I'd say to you today, what my message would be. And here's the bottom line. We built a community here, and now we're forced to leave it. We're forced to uproot ourselves and to go elsewhere. Some will be 30 minutes away, some will be 3 time zones away. But we don't have to give up what we have here. If we can take it and share it with our family and our friends and everyone we come into contact in life, then we will begin to change the world. And when we begin to change the world, then and only then will we be fulfilling the challenge which we accepted 2 short years ago by entering the halls of science and math. Thank you.
To introduce our commencement speaker, the President of the Student Government Association, Rosanna Carducci.
Good morning. I have been given the honor of introducing to you today our commencement speaker, Dr. Stephen Vogel. Before I turn over the podium, I would like to provide you with a brief summary of his distinguished scientific career. Professor Vogel graduated from Tufts University in 1961 and was awarded a National Science Foundation Graduate Fellowship. He was a junior fellow at Harvard University and received his PhD from that institution in 1966. Since that time, Dr. Vogel has served as a professor in the Duke University Department of Zoology. During his tenure at Duke, Professor Vogel has been named a Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and, in 1986, received the Trinity College Distinguished Teaching Award. Professor Vogel's scientific talents extend far beyond the classroom and are evident in his numerous natural and physical science publications. In 1990, Professor Vogel's book, Life's Devices, was awarded the Stone Prize for Excellence in Scientific Writing for Public Understanding. Professor Vogel epitomizes the values and educational beliefs of NCSSM by stressing the applications of scientific principles in everyday living experiences. It is only fitting that as we, the class of 1992, prepare to face the future, Dr. Vogel provide us with his views regarding the role of science in our lives. It is with great pleasure that I introduce to you Dr. Stephen Vogel.
After that sort of introduction, I think it's only incumbent upon me to admit to you, in all honesty, that I do put my pants on one leg at a time. It's also very flattering to have been invited to this occasion. It's a truly beautiful graduation. If you're a little choked up, that's all right. You're supposed to be. I remember my own graduation exactly 35 years ago. What I mainly remember about it is that when we lined up to march, the ground was a little bit spongy, and the girl in front of me had spiked heels on, and when Mr. Elgar's music started, she stepped out of them, and I stepped upon them. She pitched forward. There was a great deal of commotion until we all got ourselves back upright together, and not too much worse for the wear. I'm afraid I don't remember very much else about the occasion. I'm particularly pleased to be invited here because I have no formal connection with the school. The only time I attended one of the athletic events, I actually was cheering for the other side. But I've had a great deal of contact with the graduates of the school, and in my capacity of a teacher over at Duke, all have been thoroughly admirable people and certainly enjoyable people. And by only a slight extrapolation, I'm sure all of you must be also. More to the point of a commencement talk, I like what I've heard about the sort of education that goes on here. And that's not just because it might produce a few practicing scientists, although I wouldn't be unhappy if that were to happen. And I don't want really to talk here about doing science. What I want to do instead is to say a few words in favor of thinking in the way that we call scientific. Because I think that whatever accident led to your being in this particular commencement today, you graduates have been exposed to a way of thinking that really you must not lose. It's a way of thinking that is all too rare, and it's a way of thinking that will become ever more critical. So where to start? Well, I usually lecture about fairly concrete things, so let me start with an example. One last problem, just when you thought you were through examinations. Okay, according to the best current estimates, the human population is now growing at about 2% per year. Say you mention this estimate to someone, and the response you get is something that sounds perfectly reasonable, and that is a reminder that, well, originally there were very few humans, and now there are quite a lot of humans. We've always been growing as a species, and so what is so abnormal about that? It's quite the historic pattern. Well, you're a product of a school which stresses logical, quantitative thinking, and you want to prove that that 2% growth rate is a serious aberration, quite impossible as a historic norm, a pathological situation, if you will. So how can you do it? you want to refute the notion that the 2% historic growth rate is indeed the norm. Well, I'll suggest a way you can do it. You can extrapolate backwards. Assume the 2% was in fact the norm. You can calculate, metaphorically speaking, when Adam and Eve left the Garden of Eden. And what's the answer? Well, I'll pause, and actually you can estimate it yourself. If you're into this sort of thing, you probably can do it in your head. How long have humans been on Earth? Or at least, how long since there were only 2 humans if the growth rate is 2% per annum? Well, I'll give you the answer. I didn't do it in my head, by the way. I used a hand calculator. It turns out to be 1,100 years. Those ancient Romans, they must have been mythological. Clearly, the 2% growth rate is an aberration. It cannot have been the norm. So what of it? Well, what can we hang on this rather weird argument, this refutation of something by reducing it to an absurdity? Well, what I want to hang on it really are 3 rather distinct, fairly distinct points. First, and most generally, about a role of education. I think maybe the least flattering way of viewing an education, but possibly the most important role that the process has. Education ought to be a process that provides a person with crap detectors. We showed that one argument was patent nonsense. We might do the same with other arguments, ostensibly plausible arguments. They might be political arguments or social arguments or economic arguments, but attractive arguments that turn out in the final analysis to be crap. An education in science, I strongly believe, is the best crap detector now on the market. And you got it. It rubs a person's nose in reality, in the real world that we can't wish away or legislate away. For example, if someone tells you that an institution or a nation has a balanced budget, you're in a position to ask yourself whether it's really balanced or whether it's only nominally so, whether the balance of numbers with dollar signs really reflects the full story, or whether people are becoming discouraged, roofs are developing leaks, infrastructure is deteriorating, competitiveness decreasing, or what have you. In short, you're in a position to examine the whole balance sheet and not be taken in by something where the dollar signs come out at the bottom and told, well, everything is fine. If you're being fed crap, you need to recognize it. The second thing I want to hang on that funny example I gave you, that funny quantitative problem I gave you earlier, is a little more specific. It was an argument about a process, not about an event. But if you pick up the papers in the morning and you read them, you learn the news. That's news. That's about events, not about processes, not about interrelationships. But I think, and I very strongly think this, that we'll more likely prosper or suffer as people as a result of processes and interrelationships than as a result of discrete events. But these aren't news. You can only extract them from the media by careful filtering and rejection of all the very exciting but ultimately irrelevant events. Math and science are about processes and interrelationships, and only an education which stresses them really permits a person to select what matters for attention and not to be distracted by the events. I think most of our serious contemporary problems are chronic ones, process ones, and by the time they're events, by the time they're news, they'll be either very much more difficult to deal with or perhaps even impossible to deal with. Or else they come in and out of the news depending on personalities and politics, and the result of that is a kind of cynicism that only adds to the ultimate task of persuasion and rectification. You can give any number, one can give any number of examples of these. If you just look at environmental concerns, I'm talking about things like deforestation, global warming, oceanic pollution, loss of arable land, and so forth. And that's just looking at environmental problems. All are processes, process problems, interaction problems, not specific event problems. And the interactions ought to be stressed. As the ecologist Paul Ehrlich once said, quote, "You cannot do one thing," unquote. But people constantly propose solutions to problems that sound just great until you consider the interconnections, all the other interrelated problems that might be made worse by the solutions. Only by considering the interactions can you really define the full character of the problems. As a rather depressing example, consider a problem of serious food shortage, famine, if you want to put the nasty name on it. In a historical and essentially rural context, it is nasty, but it's an essentially self-correcting, stable process. By contrast, one can anticipate, if you look at this thing in terms of interconnections, that serious food shortages in an urbanized world, and even the third world countries now are substantially urbanized, serious food shortages in a third world, in an urbanized context, may be quite a different and somewhat scarier prospect. When you need working infrastructure to get the food from the producer to the consumer, a disruption due to any sort of shortfall may produce not a nasty but stable situation, but a truly unstable, degenerative spiral. That was about processes and interaction. Let me move to the third and the final point that I want to draw out of this example. I picked the example because it was a completely quantitative one, both in statement and refutation. If ever quantitative thinking was vital, it's now. And that's what you get from an education in science and mathematics. To return to our example, again, briefly, some years ago, actually 12 years ago, when I was a mere lad of 40, I was teaching a class, and I asked them to guess what I thought, not they, but I, was the most important historical happening of my lifetime. I was then 40 years old. I got in response all sorts of suggestions of wars and inventions. But I thought, and I still do, that what mattered most was that I had lived through a doubling of the Earth's population. It was of special significance since all of the evidence suggested that never before in human history could a mere 40-year-old have experienced an entire doubling. Of course, now it's very nearly a tripling that I've been through. That happening, which I hesitate to call an event, was something that was understandable only in quantitative terms. It was a process, not an event, and its importance comes entirely from its interactions with other things such as soil and crops and energy and so forth. There's an international conference on the environment going on now in Rio, in Brazil. For political reasons, they have decided not to get into the hot water of population growth. Now, what deliberate self-delusion to declare that the present numbers and the anticipated numbers of humans have nothing to do with our problems or their possible solutions. But I think those numbers have to be faced up to in all of their quantitative complexity. Not just our numbers, but the first derivative, that 2% growth rate. Yeah, you know about derivatives now, you say. It's important. Most people don't. And even the second derivative is of considerable interest. Whether it's negative, that is, drop in the growth rate, is what we hope. And then we have to look and see whether that drop in the growth rate is due to a decreasing birth rate, which we might regard as good, or an increasing death rate, which we might regard as bad. There's even more layers of quantitative complexity on this. The peculiar age structure of rapidly growing populations makes solution to any of the practical problems even more difficult. In a rapidly growing country, which most of the countries on Earth now are, you people, you graduates, would now be in the older half of the population. And the implications of that on future growth, on the momentum of population growth, are enormous. We have now on Earth countries where if every female limited herself to 2 children, we would have not stability, but a tripling before stability was achieved. There is so much momentum built into the system by this peculiar age structure. These are easy calculations, really, but they involve numbers and a quantitative view of reality. They ought not be political, the property of some ideology with which you agree or disagree. They're just numbers, quantitative reality. What's political, of course, is what, if anything, we do about them and whether or not we choose to recognize them, but not whether they exist. And that's why you folks, you graduates, are rather more important than you might guess. Maybe you don't have the tools to solve these kinds of problems that my generation seems, by omission perhaps, to have bequeathed you. Maybe nobody has the tools. We don't really know. But at least you have the tools to recognize them in their inescapable reality and to begin to decide which ones are most important and which ones are mere distractions. I happen to use environmental and population problems as examples. Again, one could have made the same arguments, the same points, using social problems or economic problems. In conclusion, I salute you and wish you well. I do apologize, at least a little, if I've thrown cold water on your enjoyment of the occasion. If you go on to college, and I'm sure virtually all of you will, I do seriously hope it lives up to your expectations. It might not. If it doesn't, I hope you do your part to help make it do so. Remember, bear this in mind, it's a very rare teacher that can keep going without the stimulation of bright, interactive, inquisitive, and irreverent students. Remember, education is like making love. It can't be done right unless both sides are active participants. So good luck, and remember to make sure that your slip isn't showing and that your trousers aren't unzipped. Thank you.
Director Frederick, I am pleased to present to you the class of 1992. These students have fulfilled all graduation requirements as set forth by the Board of Trustees.
Mr. Gray, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, the Educational Advisory Council, Foundation Board, and this school which serves the people of North Carolina, I accept your recommendation and authorize the presentation of these diplomas. As these diplomas are awarded, we ask this audience, which is justifiably proud of its graduates, to discipline their delight in their own graduates. We may proceed with the diplomas.
Cheryl Lynn Aldalve. Daniel Peter Down Aldrich. Melissa Lorraine Amato. Sonia Denise Amos. Carrie Lisa Anderson. Hannah Frances Arps. Michael Edward Ulmer. Randy Kent Austin Jr. Alan Joseph Back. Chris Baker. Matthew Douglas Barker. Christian Winford Barnes. Jill Suzanne Barrett. Catherine Diane Beam. Dorian Frederick Bell. Andre LaShawn Bennett. Jabbar Ramon Bennett. Patricia Renee Berry. Ravindra Bisram. John Samuel Blackman. Ryan Neal Bookout. Lydia Ann Francis Bachnight. Susan Dorothea Bramley. George Matthews Bridgers. Andrea Lauren Bren. Colin John Brodsky. Christopher Jean Brown. Crystal Lee Brown. Latoya Antoinette Brown. Nakia Chandra Brown. Rhett Shane Brown. Michael Stewart Browning. Owen David Boogie. T. Vu Bowie. Brian Jennings Byerly. Yasmin Lara Bynum. Rose Aaron Caldwell. Mary Pat Campbell. Rosanna Carducci. Brian Douglas Cavanis. Latarsha Chambers. Eileen Chang. Kristen Margaret Chester. Sherry Lynn Shimoleski. Jean Margaret Ann Choi. Sora Chung. Kimberly R. Clemens. William Kenneth Cochran, Jr. Justin Lawrence Cole. Catherine Genevieve Collingwood. Jason Todd Cook. Jason Carter Copeland. Christine Viola Cowan. Christopher Lynn Cox. Margaret Elaine Cross Meekins. Jonathan Brian Kraus. William Stephen Dale, Jr. Karen Lynn Dalton. Ron Diallo Davis. Tanya Ray Davis. John Elliott Durbin. Shavanta Laverne Dickerson. Jeremy Sean Dilbeck. Richard Alexander Donaldson, 6th. Blythe Ellie Dyson. Stacy Lynn Ebron. Nancy Ray Edwards. Nikki Nicole Forney. Paul G. Fortenberry. Christy Dawn Fowler. Brian Thomas Fricks. Derek Liddell Gaines. Kevin Wayne Gainey. Brian Scott Gardner. Robert William Gardner. Sonia Kristen Garner. Suzanne Lynn Garrett. Crystal German. Christopher Gillette. Robert Todd Gerardin. John Benjamin Jertson. Artura Dorcel Goods. Kelly Melissa Goss. Jenny Lee Graham. Gregory Wayne Guffey. Christopher Emil Hagans. Christopher Robert Hahn. Derek Patrick Hales. Thomas Brett Hall. Jeremy Leonard Hardison. Serena Coletta Hargrove. Regina Devon Hayes. Stearns Nicholas Heinzen. Joseph Hilliard Hensley, Jr. Mary Elizabeth Herring. Thejan Ramesh Hitchcad. William Travis Hips. Lena Carteret Horsley. Jeffrey Allen Huang. Jennifer Lee Hubbard. Kristen Lee Hutchings, Donna Yates Jennings, Christine Erica Johnson, Chasa Nicole Johnson, Michael Resall Jones, Shannon Elizabeth Jones, Wuche James Jong, Mohit Sorab Kasabatla, Jason Neil Katz, Emily Ross Kerr, John Francis Kelly, Jason David Kendallhart, Charles Kirkanich IV, Christine Margaret Kidd, Mary Ellen Keyshaw, Chrislyn Joan King, Mary Lynn Eugene King, Theodore Vincent Kingsbury, Krishna Sadeshwara Kishore, Dayanada Unisa Kissler, Cynthia Marie Knight, Alan Henry Krakauer, John Austin Love, Roland Lamont Leak, Teresa Lee, Jason William Leah, Anne Elizabeth Lincoln, Ebony Lynette Lloyd, Douglas Scott Love, Adam Edward Majeski, Kwame Jungwa Manley, James McCotter Manning Jr., Stacy Ann Marsh, Christopher Bradley Marshall, Jason Worth Martin, Jeffrey Neal Maston, Keisha Akim Maynard, Benjamin Waltz Maynard, Eric Eugene Mayo, Sujin Lee McCoy, Nancy Lynn McGee, Bradford Wayne McKesson, Kenneth Pearl McMahon, Brooke Lee McRae, Catherine Cherry Myers, Jeffrey Lynn Mishak, Max Fitzglenn Mitchell, Christine Ann Moritz, Vanna Vince Mua, Marcella Christina Musgrove, Christine Carol Moot, Catherine Michelle Nasser, Francis Brent Neal Jr., Jennifer Ann Neal, Dwayne Richard Need, Claudia Michelle Newman, Consuela Jasmina Nobles, Daniel Lyle Knopfsinger, John Richard Oakley, Alan Worth Olmsted, Mark Davis Overcash. Thomas Bradley Owens. Ashley Edward Pack. Jen Park. Charles Bernard Parker. Jason Owen Parker. Heather Noel Parsons. David Scott Pascal. Prerna Patel. Gilletta Ontario Patrick. John Wiggs Patty. Timothy John William Perkins. Stephen Richard Pescator Jr. Jeffrey Charles Peters. Erica Ann Peterson. Christopher Brett Peterson. Margaret Elizabeth Pettit. Martha Ruffin Phillips. Kevin Lamont Pierce. Eric Allen Plaxon. Christopher Jason Preacher. Johanna Ross Price. Michelle Denise Prisby. Amber Lee Radachowski. Nicole Mary Radziwill. Jamie Patrick Rollerson. Jason Rank. Thomas Duke Ricks. Sarah Allison Robbins. Amy Ellen Rose. Daniel Todd Rose. Jason Paul Roth. Kitchewa Rulak. Andy Harold Rowe. Keith Burniton Saunders. Daniel Scott Shudell. Sean Thomas Sewell. Manan Ramesh Shah. Rupal Harshad Shah. Imani Mumina Shahid El. Danisha Angela Sherrill. Christina Elizabeth Shy. Glenn Scott Simmons. Michael Anthony Simon. Catherine Elizabeth Skinner. James Claude Smith, Jr. Benjamin Thomas Soul. Sarah Knox Suter. Holly Nicole Stallings. Scott Robin Starron. Paula Renee Sutton. Meenakshi Swaminathan. John Hunter Tart. Thomas Carson Terrell. Tanya Elaine Terry. Nathaniel Dwayne Thomas, Jr. Alexandria Janine Thompson. John Scott Tillman. Kelly Shawi Sai. Unda Tugman. Srinath Vadlamani.
Good job with the name.
Oh, Carolyn Howes Vanderbogert. Vanessa Linnell Venable. Tiku Jacob Verghese. Kimberly Shea Wagoner. Sharon Blanche Walton. Brian Christopher Warren. Matthew David Welch. Gregory Richard Werner. Scott McDonald Westbrook. Ryan Craig Wigley. Nathaniel Jarrett Wilkes. Audrey Therese Williams. Bonnie Jean Williams. Danica Michelle Williams. Wayne Leon Williams. Amy Elizabeth Wilson. Christina Marie Wilson. Randall Otto Wilson. Lori Beth Whitland. Charles Daniel Wright. Anthony Pierre Yoder. David Young. Angela Camille Younger.
Good morning, parents, faculty, guests, administrators, rising seniors, and of course the newly graduated. And also to Lisa Bach in the development office for her assistance, and also to all the seniors that contributed. And now it's my pleasure, in return for everything that this school has done for us, to present the school with a new sound system, which will be used to replace the one already in SAB. Thank you.
On behalf of NCSSM, I acknowledge this gift and thank you, the graduates of 1992. As we leave here, I would ask something special of the graduates, and that is that they stand for the teachers and the staff here who have served them so well and give them a round of applause for the 2 years of service they have given you. If you'll be seated, please. Giving advice is a prerogative of a person in my position. Some would say it's a propensity, but there is one difference. My advice will be valuable right now. We ask that the audience remain in their places until the speakers, board, and graduates have marched past the faculty toward the Bryan reception. Thank you.